Thank you for joining us. I'm in Chicago at the Standard Club to cover special events for Israel, and I have the following verse from the Bible. Friends always show their love. What are brothers for, if not to share troubles? This verse from Proverbs 17:17 really says it all. It clearly defines the cherished friendship with Israel of our honored guest today, the Reverend Jerry Clark, founder of Jerry Clark Ministries. He is well known for his passion and unwavering voice for Israel, with his inspiring and thought-provoking commentaries. This exceptional friend, together with his congregation, have stood by Israel in good and troublesome times. Reverend Jerry Clark and the Israel Government Tourist Office Consul, Omer Eshel, will be with us following these messages.
My name is Omer Eshel. I'm the Consul of Tourism of the Israel Government Tourist Office Midwest region, based here in Chicago. And I'd like to personally invite each and every one of you to visit the land of Israel, the land of the Bible, the land of our ancestors, and also the land of modern, the land of understanding, the land of museums, the land of books, the land of cafes, the land of wine, the land of beer, the land of everything you can possibly imagine. Because in Israel, once you visit Israel, you'll never be the same. See you in Israel.
With us now is Reverend Jerry Clark and Consul Omer Eshel. A privilege and pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Likewise, thank you.
Omer, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you, Shalom.
So here we are facing a new reality. The world is ever-changing, politics in the Middle East, and despite technology and the information age, people are more misinformed than ever. Reverend, what are your thoughts on that?
The media, social media, the internet, newspapers, radio, television, every platform has good and bad. Unfortunately, as relates to Israel, present-day, modern-day Israel, there is such a media bias against Israel. And a lot of that is fueled by what I call the bleeding heart mentality. And people who, particularly in the Christian community, which I'm a part of, who really don't know their scripture. And if they claim to know their scripture, they don't believe in it, and they don't act on it. The scripture is very clear how Christians are to respond to Israel. God makes it very clear in Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And we're seeing that being played out in today's society. Nations, particularly the United States, and I have been very, very critical recently of the United States' position as it relates to Israel. And unfortunately, there is a growing movement in the United States against Israel, being fed by television, newspaper, social media. And the mentality seems to be that if a person in authority, a high-ranking political figure, says it, well, it must be true. Then we accept it to be true, rather than searching for the truth on our own. And the truth is, as we relate to Israel, we are to be defenders, supporters, and vocal advocates for modern-day Israel. God makes it very clear in the book of Zechariah. He says that Israel is the apple of his eye. And woe to the nation that touches Israel, because those who touch Israel, those who attack Israel, it says, surely their slaves will plunder their land. And we're seeing that being played out today. Iraq is a prime example. Back in the regime of Saddam Hussein, when the Scuds were filed at Israel, he touched Israel. And look what happened. The land slaves plundered the land. And we're seeing it happen today. So I think we have a growing, I'm very concerned about the mood in not only in this country, but around the world, particularly in Europe, of the rise in anti-Semitism. I just published a commentary yesterday about the rise in anti-Semitic activity on our college campuses that are being fueled, I believe, by this bleeding heart mentality. How can you say that throwing a Molotov cocktail at a Jewish car in Israel is not an act of terrorism? That is beyond me. It is such idiocy, and it's coming from our government. And we've got people out there believing it. Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Is it the same government that states that an American officer who murders 12 people at Fort Hood and shouts Allah Akbar while doing so, that this was just an act of workplace violence? Is that the same government?
Yes. Yeah. There's a double standard. There's a double standard. And there again seems to be a prejudice and a certain bias against Israel coming from the high-rank officials of the government. Thank God we have some part of the government that is standing with Israel, that being the Congress. But as far as the administrative side, I'm very scared. I'm very concerned at what we've heard in the last several years and what we possibly are going to hear in the next 2 more years. And I don't know where we're headed with all this. I just know one thing, and I've said it publicly and I'll say it again. If the United States ever turns her back on Israel, God help the United States, because judgment will fall.
Good Lord, what an interesting observation. Consul, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, as a guest in this country, of course, I will not say anything about the federal government. I'm a guest in this country, so naturally, this is not my business to say anything about it. And I'm gracious for the federal government to host me here. I will, though, agree with the Reverend that historically speaking, every nation that turned their back against Jews, not just Israel, against their Jewish population, against Jews in the world, ceased to exist. And this is not my private viewpoint. This is an historical fact. From the time of the pharaohs that were sunk in the Red Sea, through the Romans that ceased to exist, and today they are a city and not an empire, all the way down to Spanish Empire and Nazi Germany. Every major nation that turned their back against the Jews, exactly as Zechariah said, exactly as Genesis 12:3, and I'm going to emphasize the second part. I bless those who bless thee. Yes, absolutely. I will curse those who curse thee. And that is the big thing. This is something that today we see what's going on in the Middle East. Not in Israel, thank God. Israel is a safe haven for democracy. But around us, what's going on with ISIS. If we're going to turn back to Psalm 83, he actually speaks about it, about the enemies of God who are gathering against God, against the people of God, to harm God. And he even said there that even Assyria is with them. Assyria is today the land of ISIS. So what the Reverend says, and I agree with him, biblically is correct. This was prophesied in the Bible.
Referring to the truth, seeking the truth from the Bible, and of course by actually visiting the land, is absolutely an imperative. Sir, tell us about the trips that you lead to Israel, the missions.
I've been going to Israel since 1997. I've been there over 40 times in that time frame, leading tours, organizing tours, being on tours. And in the last several years, working very closely with Israel and the Ministry of Tourism to take, in particular, pastors. It is so critical that pastors go to Israel. If you are an active ministry, and I've made this statement before, I don't think any pastor has a right to step into a pulpit and start pastoring a church until they go to Israel. That should be the very first thing they should do out of seminary or Bible college. Because there, when you go to Israel, the scripture becomes so clear. It literally jumps off the pages. As my friend Omer has said in his wonderful series, The Bible Comes to Life, the Bible comes to life. And it's a phenomenal experience to watch a pastor walking on the streets of Capernaum, the earthly home of the ministry of Jesus. And there they are. And they're weeping because they know that is where Jesus actually walked. When they look at the sunrise in the Sea of Galilee, they know for a fact that that is the same sunrise that Jesus saw. When they go out onto the water, they know that is the same Sea of Galilee that Jesus was on. So there is something that happens to a pastor, to a minister, to a spiritual leader. Yes, the same thing happens to lay people, or members of a congregation, or members or followers of a ministry. But for a pastor who is supposed to be the shepherd of the flock, there's so much that happens when they're in Israel. The beauty of Israel, of course, is to see the land, to be in touch with the people, to see for themselves firsthand that not all of Israel is in disarray, as the media would like us to believe. Yes, there are incidents, but not all of Israel is in turmoil, like CNN would want us to believe, or BBC would want us to believe, or Fox News, or the New York Times. That's just ludicrous. And when they get to Israel, it's like, wow, we really are safe. My family and friends back home were yelling at me, "Why? How could you go to Israel? Why would you want to go to Israel?" I'd rather be in downtown Jerusalem than downtown Chicago. I'm safer in Jerusalem than I am in downtown Chicago. But that's because of our faith. And there's something about going to Israel, which is why I have a passion. I just have this passion to get pastors over there. If we can get a pastor over there, they're going to come back and they're going to share that excitement with their congregation. And then they're going to say, "Congregation, we're going back because you have to experience what I've experienced." And coming up very shortly, in a few weeks, we're going to be leading pastors not only from the United States, but we're going to be leading pastors from South America, from Africa, all coming together in a mission of solidarity. We have to show the people of Israel that there are Christians around the world who love Israel, who love the Jewish people, who love people. No strings attached. Unconditional love, which is what Christianity is all about. Showing unconditional love, no strings attached. I'm not coming because I want to get you to do something. I just want to come to say, we're standing with you. We're supporting you. And that's why going to Israel is so important, particularly for anybody in a rank of ministry leadership.
Consul, what is the IGTO doing to further the concept of bringing more pastors to Israel?
Well, to look at the New Testament, there's a wonderful verse over there that says, "Come with me and I shall turn you to fishers of men." This is what Jesus says to his disciples. So this concept, what the pastor is doing right here, he's absolutely correct. Jesus did the same thing with his disciples. He's turning them to fishers of men. And we follow the same ideology and the same idea. If you're going to speak to the pastors, if you're going to speak to the head of the community, to the shepherd of the flock will follow him. And a pastor needs to understand, and he will see it when he's there, that being in the land of Israel, especially with other pastors, will bring the Bible to life into a point that when he will preach back on that Sunday morning, the Bible will come to life not just for him, but for his entire congregation. Because when he sits down there, when he speaks about the Bible, when he preached the Bible, when he says to his congregation, "I sat there and I've seen it and it's all true," that's what means the Bible comes to life. So the Israel Ministry of Tourism is backing up friends such as Pastor Clark here to send those delegations to Israel, to send pastors to Israel. We actually have an outreach to pastors and churches that what we say, a trip to Israel is not a trip. It's a journey. It's a journey of a lifetime that will forever change your life. It will not just change your life, it will also change your ministry. So it's an investment of the soul.
It also changes your attitude towards the Israeli people and the Jewish people. So many people, particularly pastors, they go over there with preconceived notions, biases, prejudices. I hear it all the time. And when they get there and they interact with the people, something miraculous happens inside their heart and their spirit. And they leave with a deeper understanding and a deeper love towards the Israeli people, towards the Jewish people. And they come back strong. And they're just warriors. And they go back with the attitude, "Don't you dare say anything against Israel."
Standing by their brothers Solidarity is such an important ideal, I would say. Consul, I'd like to ask you, what is being done not only to have friends of Israel, such as this wonderful reverend sitting here with us, what about bringing thousands of students who are brainwashed on campuses worldwide, especially also here in the US? What about bringing them to Israel?
One of my personal dreams is to copy the wonderful, wonderful, successful project of Birthright and copy that into our evangelical brothers and sisters community. One of my dreams is when people go into Bible schools in different denominations, if it's Assemblies of God, if it's UPCI, if it's Seventh-day Adventists, if it's Foursquare, all doesn't matter. Catholic Archdiocese, it doesn't really matter. For them to understand the Bible better, they need to come to Israel. And by doing so, doing in a form of a birthright. It's not going to be called a birthright. It can be called a journey of faith, or reassurance of faith. But by doing so, both sides benefit. The state of Israel, of course, because of incoming tourism and the love of Israel. We're going to accept the love. We're going to see more love to Israel because, as the Reverend said, people are going to see the truth. And the churches and the denomination benefit because they're going to have better teachers for the future. So that's one of my goals and one of the things that I'm trying to do together with many friends across, by the way, religions, Jews and Christians alike, to try to build this kind of evangelical or Christian birthright.
Absolutely essential. A journey to truth. Sir, what are your thoughts on that?
There's a scripture that says in the New Testament, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You find the truth in Israel, not only for your personal life, but for the lives of others around you. When you can come back home and say, no, 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 I've been there. I've seen it. I understand it. One of the most powerful places that a tour can stop, and not every tour does it. We're very blessed. We're able to do these things. But we are able to visit a IDF base on the Lebanese border. And we've been there many times, and it never fails. When we leave, the people are in tears because they're starting to understand the truth of the enemies of Israel. When you're looking across into Lebanon and you understand that there could be 100,000 rockets pointed back this way, and then when you turn to the right and you look into Syria, very close, and you understand that there are projectiles pointed into Israel. And now in the context of what's happening today with ISIS and the Syrian conflict, people see the land, they see the people, and they finally start to understand why Israel is so strong in defending her people. And I think it's important that we make a point here, which I think the media has missed. You know, during the conflict with Gaza, the Prime Minister and other government officials were talking about defending the citizens of Israel. And the perception in America, I believe, was, well, we're just defending the Jews. Excuse me, there are Arab Israeli citizens. There are Druze. There are Christians. There are Bedouins who are all citizens of Israel. The Israeli government is defending their security as well. So it's not just a Jewish thing. It's people who are citizens of Israel. And I think that gets lost in the mix when we're talking about, the people of Israel. Immediately say, oh, it's all the Jews. The Arabs are all shut up over here, or the Jews are all shut up. No. They have every right. Example, this past March, I don't know if you call it an opportunity or whatever, but I wound up in Hadassah Hospital for 6 days in Jerusalem. And I saw so many Arab Israelis being treated at Hadassah.
How many do you see in Arab hospitals? How many Jews are in Arab hospitals, do you think, Consul?
There's no Jews in Arab states.
I apologize again for interrupting you, but a thought came to my mind. Israel also protects the holy centers of civilization for Christianity and Judaism. When Jerusalem was occupied for 19 short years, divided for a few years, no Arab head of state ever bothered to visit Jerusalem.
Actually, it's quite amazing when people try to reinvent history, when people try to make up a story and build a narrative, which the entire narrative is actually based on our story. So when you look at the history, that claim of it was ours is completely false and incorrect. But this is how the good Lord works in mysterious ways. Before 1967, the Jordanian leveled the Jewish quarter to the ground, completely. Wanted to completely erase any Jewish memory in Jerusalem. After Jerusalem was reunited in 1967, we had a golden opportunity to dig our past. And that is why today when people visit the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, it's completely different than the other quarters. It's brand new. It looks more of a European city than it is a Middle Eastern city. However, you have special access to the underground world of Second Temple period Jerusalem on the eve of the destruction of the temple. And you can see it in places such as Zibbenberg Home in Jewish quarter, such as the Burnt House, such as the Wahel Museum. You will see that. So in a way, when the Jordanians tried to erase the memory of the Jews, they actually made it completely accessible to everybody.
And of course, speaking of history and scientific fact, you dig a hole on the Golan Heights overlooking the Sea of Galilee, and you look over towards Syria, but you dig and you'll find absolute, irrefutable proof of a Jewish history on the Golan, also as throughout Israel, but no evidence of any Arab history there. So it is kind of ludicrous what the world is presented with.
When you look at archaeological digs, as we said before, and this is a well-known fact, the only city that was established by Muslims in Israel is the city of Ramle. That is it. Every other place in Israel is based on either a Jewish settlement, an ancient settlement, or a Byzantine one. That is it. So the only place that you will not find any Jewish remains is the city of Ramle. However, in every other places in Israel, if you will dig, you will find some Arab Muslim period artifacts. Not a lot. The vast majority that you'll find is either going to be Byzantine or Herodian from the time of Herod the Great. If you go to Jerusalem, the vast majority of artifacts that you'll find are actually going to be biblical, from the time of David all the way down to Zedekiah and Ezra and Nehemiah.
The point I was trying to make, sir, is Christianity and Judaism precedes Islam by more than 700 years.
There's a statement that I heard from John Hagee, which I plagiarize, for lack of a better term, but it's a good statement, so let's not reinvent the wheel. Judaism does not need Christianity to explain its existence, but Christianity needs Judaism to explain its existence. The Apostle Paul makes it very clear. He says Christianity is the branch grafted in to the root of Judaism. And Christians need to understand that, and that, unfortunately, that message is not being taught from our pulpits, and thus people are walking away with a warped value system as it relates to Israel.
So many warped concepts in this world, and it is so important that leaders such as yourself, sir, and you are doing your part to contribute to a more rational world. Tell us a little bit about your pilgrimages to Israel, your tours, your missions.
Obviously, we go because we want people to experience the land. I still remember my first trip in 1997. I was so excited. At the last minute, I was asked to go on the trip with the church. And, I'd been a Christian for many, many years, grew up in the Catholic Church, went into ministry in 1987. And then when the senior pastor came into my office and said, we'd like you to go on the trip, I just was thrilled. And I'm thinking I'm going to be able to see all this ancient land and these ruins and camels and donkeys and Bedouin. And we land at Ben Gurion Airport. We're driving down the main street of Tel Aviv, and I'm looking around, and oh, there's a Kmart. Oh, gosh, there's an Office Depot. Best Buy. McDonald's? Where was this ancient land? It's so modern. It's like the 51st state of the United States. But then there is an ancient side. There's nothing like driving down the road and you've got all this modern offices on this side, and over here you have these Bedouin camps with a John Deere tractor sitting in the middle, or a Cadillac sitting in the middle of the Bedouin camp. It's truly amazing. It's an amazing land, amazing people. That's what is, you want people to experience that. So on our trips, there's spiritual sites, there's archaeological sites, there's historical sites, there's cultural sites, because in a very short period of time, people have jokingly called our trips not so much of a pilgrimage, but more of a cattle call. Because it's up early in the morning and it's go, 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 and on the bus, off the bus, on the bus, off the bus, because we want them to see so much in a very short period of time. And then hopefully they'll come back a second time to see more and spend more time. But the trip it truly is, the pastors we took last January, every single one of them, the trip has revolutionized their ministry. And we have pastors coming back with their own churches now. And that's what it's all about. So it's a way to open your eyes and open your heart and to discover the truth. That's the big issue. And I want to make a point. I think it's important. We talked about this ideology that's in America and across the world. People say, how are we going to change it? Well, we can change people's thinking, by doing this and doing that. If we don't get to the next generation, when they're 4 and they're 5, we'll never change the way people think about Israel. Because it's that younger generation. If you believe something and are taught something long enough, at the age of 4 and 5, even though it is false, you will accept it to be true.
Reverend, this has been a real pleasure and privilege. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Consul. This concludes our special program for today from On Location at the Standard Club in Chicago. I'm Richard Peritz. Thank you for being with us.